I've only had one encounter with Joe Biden, and it was before he decided to run for president again. I was in a wheelchair. I was backstage after speaking. He came up to me. I'd never met him before in my life. He came up to me, put his hands on my shoulders and his forehead on my forehead for several seconds and had conversation with me. If he had done that as a student on a college campus, under his proposed rule, I would have a Title IX sexual harassment allegation to levy against him because of his conduct. I heard from many students who had lesser encounters or lesser situations than what I had to encounter with him, and yet he wants this for college students, but will not acknowledge and agree to probes into allegations of much more egregious conduct on his part against other women. I'm just using it as an example to say this administration is so bent on trying to politicize and weaponize a law that was meant to protect women and to give them access to education, not to weaponize it to harm others. And, this is a really, really bad direction that they're taking with their proposed Title IX rule. And I hope people will speak up about it.
Wait, can we just back up? You were in a wheelchair and he came over and he touched foreheads with you?
Yes.
Oh my God. Why? Were you just...
It was...
No. Yeah. Disgusting. You don't want to touch foreheads with anybody. I don't even touch foreheads with my husband. I mean, that's bizarre. And another example of his inappropriate boundary crossing.
Exactly.
What was it that he had to... Was he saying, like, I have a terrible headache and you feel it? Like, what was he saying? How is this in any way okay to do in public?
Good question. He asked if I had any hardware as a result of my injury, and I had broken my pelvis. Then he told me that he had 9 screws in his shoulder, but everybody thought they were in his head. And he was doing this while holding onto my shoulders with his forehead pressed to mine. And
you couldn't get away.
Nowhere to go to or escape.
I mean, it's like, so you were basically harassed, the legal definition of sexual harassment by Joe Biden while in a wheelchair. That's our takeaway here. All right, shifting gears now because I've got to get to this soundbite. I wasn't live on the air on Friday and I saw this. I couldn't believe my eyes and ears, but I mean, I don't know why. I don't know why I couldn't. Dr. Fauci is out there in the news again, talking about himself and his effect on others. I'll let the soundbite speak for itself and then get your reaction. Listen to this.
It's called the Fauci effect, which is sort of like, trust me, I don't get excited about that. I mean, it's nice, but I mean, people go to medical school now. People are interested in science. Not because of me, because most people don't know me, who I am. My friends know me, my wife knows me, but people don't know me. It's what I symbolize. And what I symbolize in an era of the normalization of untruths and lies and all the things you're seeing going on in society from January 6th to everything else that goes on, people are craving for consistency, for integrity, for truth, and for people caring about people.
Oh my God.
It's delusional. It's absolutely delusional. And I think the kids call that a humble brag. He wasn't too good at the humble bit. He did pretend that he wasn't excited by this development or theoretical development. I'm not convinced it's real. But he's clearly thrilled by it, which in and of itself is untoward. But does he not realize how he's seen by most people? That's not how he's seen by most people. He probably more than anyone is responsible for a collapse in trust in science and in the establishment and in public health authorities. That is just That is two Americas right there. Unfortunately, the one he lives in has about 5% of the people in it.
It's delusional. It's so that's not the Fauci effect. The Fauci effect is as soon as you hear something from a public health official, close your ears and run because it's likely to be a lie meant to control you. I mean, no, it's not about, Fauci's synonymous with truth and consistency and integrity and caring about people. He's admitted to some of his multiple lies. He's already on record. How is he the face of truth? And he's still in his position, Charles. I mean, I realize that the CDC, which is not his organization, but they all work in tandem, has now finally come out and wants to be patted on the back for getting to the place that we've all been for a long time, which is recognizing something about natural immunity and saying don't treat people differently versus if they've been vaccinated versus not vaccinated. And the social distancing doesn't need to go on. And we should stop testing asymptomatic people. Finally, the CDC comes out and says that. But Fauci's done absolutely no accounting for his misleading and terrible policies that have hurt so many people. And honestly, you could make a strong case led to the deaths of many people as well.
Yeah, I think the worst part on reflection, I hadn't actually heard the full clip until you just played it to me, is the part at the end where he talks about caring about people. Because this really was the biggest problem that we faced over the last 2 years, is that people like Fauci and his acolytes genuinely believed that the dispute in the United States on policy grounds was between people who cared and people who didn't. People who wanted to save lives and people who didn't. People who thought that human beings were more important than profits and people who didn't. But of course, that's not the case. The debate was how best to navigate a whole host of competing interests. And we're now seeing the other side of the ledger day in, day out, with children who are behind in school, children whose social development has been stunted, business owners who lost their life's work during the lockdowns and haven't got it back, and possibly will never get it back. Increased suicide rates, drug addiction rates, alcohol addiction rates. I don't know what the answers are. I'm one guy. I have my own priors. I have my own preferences. I have my own way of thinking. But even I was aware that the whole question was one of trade-offs. And it's remarkable to me that 2 years later, when put in a position from which he can reflect, Anthony Fauci still thinks that this was about truth and lies, that this was about caring and not caring, that this was about science and rubishness, and that is just false.
There's more reporting this morning on her concession speech, or her, it's not really a farewell speech. It's more like, I'll see you shortly for the presidential run speech, where, do you know that guy, James Goldston, who used to run ABC News, who's been helping her with the January 6th committee theater, produce it and try to make everything snazzy and TV, appropriate. He was there shooting her little concession speech, her, I'll be back speech. Clearly, she really is planning some sort of a political comeback, or maybe some documentary about herself that nobody wants to see. And in the midst of all of this, maybe that's why she incorporated this reference to our 16th and, arguably greatest president ever. Here's the sound, and then we'll talk about it. This is SOT 3.
The great and original champion of our party, Abraham Lincoln, was defeated in elections for the Senate and the House before he won the most important election of all. Lincoln ultimately prevailed. He saved our Union, and he defined our obligation as Americans for all of history.
Okay. What was that doing in there? And do we really believe there's any political future for Liz Cheney?
Well, let's start with the obvious fact that there's never been a candidate for office in history who's had such ample time to plan a concession speech, right? she's had months and months and months to come to grips with the inevitable, and getting blown out by 40, I think, may have even exceeded her expectations in that regard.
Yeah.
But obviously, at some point along the way, she basically just stopped campaigning, right? I mean, she made her entire campaign and her entire political identity about Donald Trump, right? And so, like, I read in the New York Times this piece about how Hageman, who defeated her, told her staff that you want to just go, let's do the bare minimum research here. Let's look on her congressional website and see how many times she's mentioned Wyoming or inflation or Biden, right? Zippo, right? It was just Trump. It was just January 6th. So, I mean, look, if you're running to try to represent people and their interests, I don't know if anybody's noticed, but the economy's not awesome, right? I got to imagine
Not
people
awesome.
in Wyoming have a opinion on that. Well, the representative isn't really interested in that, apparently.
She's way more interested in taking shots at Trump. She's got like a personal thing about Trump. I get it. She didn't like January 6th, but like to have been this obsessed with it for this long, given the numbers facing the economy and her hometown, like there's some sort of personal thing going on there. And then to use the dad at the last minute, like Trump's terrible. I was like, okay, she needs to move on. The country's focused on other things. The only people interested in that are at the Lincoln Project, which is probably why she had that reference in her little speech. They see her as the modern day Lincoln.
I think it's a fitting. I think it's a fitting end to this saga, in that, you know, her campaign eventually just became a theater production, like you were saying earlier, Megyn, with the snazzy TV production of the January 6 hearings, and, you know, they bring in the big wigs to make it snazzy and all that sort of thing. Well, you know, in television, you get to the end of season 1, and, you know, some characters, they're no longer on the show.
Kill off the character.
Yeah. And that's, you know, that's Liz Cheney's fate. You know, they did the focus groups, they listened to the panel, and they're like, we don't really like her as a character on this show.
She's not
anymore.
coming back for season 2.
Au contraire. Listen to what she said to the Today Show when they pressed her about whether she was going to be running for president. Safor.
Are you thinking about running for president?
That's a decision that I'm going to make in the coming months, Savannah. I'm not going to make any announcements here this morning, but it is something that I'm thinking about, and I'll make a decision in the coming months.
Okay. Literally,
Unreal.
other than the Lincoln Project, who would vote for Liz Cheney? Well, like,
Who?
who?
There are always going to be half a dozen people who get less than 1% in Iowa, and I guess she's going to cast her name in with that.
Is that just for the end of her series that she's shooting with Tom Goldston, the ABC News guy? Because I don't understand. Liz Cheney seems too smart to think in any world she's got a shot. And by the way, for what party would she be running?
Well, that's a great question. That is a great question.
I think it comes down. So there's something I always say: you can either make a point or you can make a difference. And I think she's not interested in making a difference. She's not concerned with the interests of the people of Wyoming. She's trying to make a point. She's like, oh, wow, democracy is going to die if people don't vote for me. If people don't love me, it means democracy is dying. And this is all Trump's fault. She's done nothing to address the concerns of the people of Wyoming. This isn't about Trump. This is about her not doing her job. When you have over 2/3 of voters in her own party said, we don't want you representing us. You haven't done your job.
And right now is sort of a honeymoon with the liberal media and sort of the establishment left. But I think what she's going to find out here over the next few months or the next year is that honeymoon phase is going to wear thin pretty quickly. Yep. I mean, you remember when Howard Schultz, the Starbucks CEO, was going to launch this independent bid, and everyone was super excited right at the beginning. And then the entire Democrat Party was like, hey, actually, no, don't do that because you're going to siphon away votes from us. And I think this whole honeymoon's going to end real quick.
Just to give people, I said 5 before the break, 6 rules of the 75 Hard program, just to give you the top 6 here. If you skip a day, you must start over. Pick a diet to follow. He's not recommending, anyone. You figure it out. Pick a diet to follow with no alcohol or cheat meals. Drink a gallon of water daily. Complete 2 45-minute daily workouts. Read 10 pages per day of a nonfiction or entrepreneurial book. Take progress photos every day. So that is for sure a challenge. 75 days. That's not short, right? 2.5 months. Mm-hmm. There I have my math straight. No cheat meals, not a sip of alcohol, 2 daily workouts. I can barely get myself to do 1. How am I going to do 2 45 workouts a day? Why do I do this? Because it's going to create mental toughness. But what's the regime? What's the regimen about?
Well, it's about inconvenience. Okay. There's a reason for every single one of those items, a very specific reason. And if you read the book, it'll go into depth of what each one is. But essentially, the whole point of the program is to put yourself in the most inconvenient, non-compromising situation that you possibly can. Meaning, there is no room for substitutions here. There is no room for, oh, you know what? I don't feel like it. I'm going to give myself a break, or I'm going to give myself a mental day, or all this shit that people are doing now about letting themselves off the hook. Because letting yourself off the hook is the reason that you are where you are in this state of unhappiness, in this state of unfulfillment. And so what we're looking to do over the next 75 days is to correct that behavior and give you a new perspective on what it takes to actually build resiliency, toughness, grit, fortitude. And I can promise you, we've had people from all, and by the way, the program's free. You can listen to the program on my podcast for free. You don't have to buy the book. If you want to buy the book, that's great. It'll give you a more in-depth description, but this is not something that you must do. And I like to make that really clear, because this is not some sort of like money-making thing for me. This is something that I want you to do so that you improve, so that our culture improves, so that we can get our fucking country back. Okay. But the point of what I'm getting at in terms of, actually, I got off track. You're going to have to bring me back in.
No worries. This is actually where I want to go with it, because you've got the 75 hard, you've got these 6 rules. Again, the book is called 75 Hard, A Tactical Guide to Winning the War with Yourself. And you've got to instill discipline. It's got to be hardcore discipline, and you got to do it faithfully. One of the things I know that you've written about is you may be holding yourself back with negative self-talk, but your friends may be holding you back as well. And you write about how you may actually have to say to your best bud, I'm not going out Thursday or Friday or Saturday or next Thursday. Like, it's very, especially for young people whose like social life revolves around drinking and eating at the big restaurants and all that. It's not going to be easy.
No, it's not. It's very inconvenient. It's very hard, and it's not for everyone. Okay. If you're happy living your life, and you're happy with yourself, and you're happy with, like, this is not, if you are happy, just ignore what I'm saying. Okay. Like, but make sure you're genuinely happy, not this bullshit. I'm faking that I'm happy, because that's the problem that we're trying to address. We have an epidemic of fake happiness. We have an epidemic of depression. We have an epidemic of unfulfillment. We have an epidemic of people who want to be more, who are actually ashamed to even admit that they want to be more because of the cultural stipulations that society has put on wanting to be more. And if you are serious about wanting to be more, then this is a program that you should look at. However, one of the things you're going to have to do, and what I think is the magical part about the program, is you do have to learn to live with the program. You're not going to stay at home for 75 days. You're going to have to go to dinners and make positive choices. You're going to have to learn how to eat out and make the right choices. You're going to have to learn how to be social. I encourage people to not abandon their regular life, but instead to still participate in it within the guidelines of the program. Because what you're going to learn is that it's really not that hard. It's really not that hard to go out and drink a water while everybody else is drinking beer. It's really not that hard to order, a salad instead of ordering a pizza. It's just not that hard. And, but looking back, I can remember when it was hard for me. So I want to be fair when I say that. I was the person who would go to a restaurant, and if they had something I really wanted, I couldn't say no to that. I would justify it in my head. I would come up with a story of how it was okay, how I earned it, how it, whatever, we learn how to justify things so perfectly in our own brain. And I was the best at it. I could make sense of any situation. And that's also what we're trying to fix with this program, is to be able to identify when you're actually justifying things that are not good for you, things that you aren't supposed to be doing. And what this program does is it really creates a higher level of awareness so that you're able to call yourself out on your own shit from here on out in life. And because the is lack of awareness, they don't identify when it is that they are talking themselves into a decision that isn't going to serve them and their ultimate goals or their ultimate dreams or whatever they're trying to build. So they don't even identify the internal dialogue that's happening. They just think, I can't do it. And the truth is, we all have two voices in our head. I talk about it in the book. We have a boss voice, and then we have a bitch voice. And we have the voice that tells us we're great, and we have the voice that justifies all the demeaning, all the negative, all the soft behaviors, the bad habits, the things that have gotten us to this place of unsatisfaction and disappointment and frustration with ourselves. And we tend to listen to that voice much more than we listen to the voice that tells us that we can do great things. Like, hey, man, you shouldn't be stuffing that piece of pizza in your face, or you shouldn't be drinking 4 nights a week. We don't listen to that voice. We listen to the voice that's easier because it's louder, because we've conditioned ourselves to listen to it. And so what this program really does is it raises your awareness to be able to identify when it is that you are becoming your own worst enemy, and teaches you how to become your own best friend in terms of what is really great for you, in your life. Because the reality is, man, those drinks and that food and that dinner, there's going to be a million more of those things. Figure out the foundational principles of your life on how to operate, and you're going to be able to figure out just about anything.
Well, I love the challenge to exercise more self-discipline. Is there a diet, keto, paleo, intermittent fasting? What would you say, we should be doing if we want to prevent this?
And again, it's part of the overall piece that you need to look at what's driving the problem. So for some people, it's going to be very important. Some people, not quite as important. But yes, the biochemistry that needs to be addressed by the diet is, number one, you need to get people into mild ketosis. That's 1 to 4, what they call millimolar beta hydroxybutyrate. So a little bit of ketosis is helpful. And why? Because your brain runs on only 2 different types of energy: glucose, ketones. As we get older, we lose the ability to do both. And people with Alzheimer's tend to have lost both. They have the insulin resistance. That means that they don't use glucose well. And by the way, the PET scans, that's exactly what they show, that the brains don't use glucose well, but they're also not keto adapted. They're not making and using ketones. So that's the first piece. It should be plant rich. Doesn't have to be just plants, but plant rich for all the phytonutrients, should be high fiber, and should be colorful, and should be associated with a period of fasting that allows you to be metabolically flexible. And that means able to burn glucose, able to burn ketones. Most people, as I mentioned, who have Alzheimer's or pre-Alzheimer's are unable to burn either of those.
Last time you were on, you mentioned coffee. My husband gave it up for, I don't know why, but he started to resume because of the brief conversation we had. But coffee could be good.
Absolutely. And some beautiful work out of University of Florida has shown that, in fact, coffee, it reduces your likelihood of developing Alzheimer's. So yes, it's got some issues. It can be stressful for your adrenals. It can interfere with your sleep, of course. But it does, in terms of just epidemiology, it is associated with a lower likelihood of developing Alzheimer's disease.
Women get it more often than men, at least in America. Yes. And I was sitting there getting my hair done before the show today, and I was breathing in all the toxins from the hairspray and the other products that she uses. And I was like, this is why. This is why. And I was like, we should do a study to see whether news anchors or actresses or people who have to get their hair done, or women who work in hair salons get it more often than women just who have naturally gorgeous hair and don't need all that nonsense. I'm telling you, it's like the toxins. That's what I'm going for, the toxins. And also, why the women?
It's a great point. And as Maria Shriver has told us for years, this is a woman-centric disease, almost 2 to 1. About 65% of the patients are women, and about 60% of the caregivers are women. So this is a huge issue. And part of the reason may be because of the rapid hormonal change during menopause, where you lose estradiol rapidly, because estradiol does have a beautiful anti-Alzheimer effect. And as you indicated, exposure to toxins, we've been very surprised at how commonly toxins are one of the important contributors to cognitive decline that turns out to be associated with Alzheimer's disease. So yes, you may be right. Maybe time for you to write a paper on that.
I mean, it's just going to have flat hair. What about drinking? I mean, we always joke like, oh, I killed some more brain cells. Are you actually killing brain cells? I mean, are you killing the things that help memory and that you'll need to stave off dementia?
Yeah. And so, as with so many other things, there's a positive and a negative. Yes, no question, ethanol is a neurotoxin. So unfortunately, when we drink, yes, we can damage some neurons and as well as other things. But it would also, in general, when people are drinking, it's relaxing them. Lower stress is better. People who are drinking tend to have a little better, cleaner vasculature. So there's both sides here. But overall, yes, you don't want to be drinking to the extent that it impairs your cognition.
How do you find out if you're somebody who has inflammation, right? I think most of us, especially all my women friends, we all feel inflamed at the end of the day. You look good in the morning. You're like, I'll go to the beach now. If somebody told you had to go to the beach at 11 p.m., you'd be like, hell no, right? Because so does that mean we have inflammation, or is that just being a human?
Great point. So, we all know when you turn 50, what do? You go get a colonoscopy. So if you're 45 or over, you should get a cognoscopy. Blood tests, simple online cognitive test. And then if you have symptoms, you want to include an MRI with volumetrics to look at the various regions of your brain. But if you're asymptomatic and just for prevention, don't need to do that third part. Everyone should do this. When you do this, you look at blood tests. Unfortunately, many of these not being done by doctors who are treating Alzheimer patients, but they tell you if you have inflammation or if you have insulin resistance. And as an example, there are multiple ways to look at inflammation. HSCRP is the one you want. It's the simplest, quickest. This is high sensitivity C-reactive protein. It's made in your liver, and it is something that responds to inflammation.
I'm writing that down right now. HSCRP blood test. Okay, I don't know whether I've ever had that done, but I did take the cognitive test on your website. Is it your website? Yeah, I think it's yours. This morning, Apollo. That's you, right?
Yeah, I'm a consultant for Apollo. That's correct.
Okay, so I took your cognitive test this morning, and it's actually kind of fun. I recommend people go there and do it. It took 10 minutes, and you're basically just pressing shift or enter and sort of saying yes or no to the questions. But so I came out average, which I was like, okay, I'll take average. I definitely did not think I was above average when it came to my memory, but it's always been weak. So when your memory's always been kind of weak, do you forget long ago memories? Yes, but my whole life I have. I didn't have that many long ago when I was 25, but I've never been good at remembering the specifics of stories from long ago. I just have always had a bad memory. So what does that tell me? And being average at 51, what does that tell me?
Yeah, well, of course, first of all, you wouldn't be able to do what you're doing without being very sharp. But each of us has different, as we all know, we all have different challenges and we all have different strengths. And what you're describing is common. You're saying that memory has not been your strong suit since you were younger. And so that's a very important point, because what we're looking for, which is again why everyone should have a baseline if they're 45 or over, is that we want to know change. And so we've had an example for one example where a guy who was the math champion of his entire state began to have very significant dementia. And his wife took him in to see a neuropsychologist who said, oh, great news. You're scoring in the 50th percentile, so you have no problems. And his wife said, are you kidding? This guy, it was a genius. He has fallen so far from where he was. So you want to know, have things changed? And this is unfortunately when the first test you ever take, you won't know that. You need to go, you need to go several times over time to know whether things have changed. But by the way, there are things you can do to strengthen your memory. Part of this is about performance. This is not just about decline. It's also about having all of us perform better.